The reservation was for 7:30. I had made it 3 weeks in advance. Same restaurant where we had our first real date. Not the casual coffee thing, but the actual first date. White tablecloths, bread they bring out warm, the kind of place where you have to speak a little quieter because the room demands it. 8 years together, 6 of them married. I wanted to do it right. I got there early, which I always do, checked that the table was good, corner booth, not too close to the kitchen, ordered still water and waited. I remember straightening the little candle in the center of the table, even though it didn't need straightening. Small, nervous habit. She arrived looking beautiful. That part matters because it made everything that followed harder. Dark dress, the earrings I bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She smiled when she saw me, and it looked real. That smile looked completely real. We ordered drinks, talked about small things, her week at work, a show we had been meaning to finish, her sister's new apartment. Normal. Easy. The kind of conversation that fills space without asking anything of either person. Then her phone came out. Not dramatically. She didn't slam it on the table or make a show of it. She just set it face up beside her bread plate, the way people do when they're expecting something. I noticed, but said nothing. Couples check their phones at dinner. It's not a crime. I told myself that. But then it lit up, and she reached for it faster than I had ever seen her reach for anything. Not a glance, a read, a careful, full read. And then I watched her face. Something moved through it. Not stress, not annoyance. Something softer than that. Something that had no business being on her face at our anniversary dinner. She put the phone down. Screen down this time. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just my mom." She picked up her menu. I had already seen the screen when it lit up. Not the message, just the name.
It wasn't her mom. I looked down at my own menu. The words didn't register. I was reading the same line about the sea bass over and over without absorbing a single word. My chest had gone tight, in a way that felt almost mechanical, like something had been turned down in there. I didn't say anything. I smiled when she recommended the pasta. I asked the waiter about the specials. I laughed once at something she said, and I don't remember what it was, but the laugh came out sounding normal. Inside, something had already shifted. Not broken, not shattered, shifted, like furniture moved 2 inches in a dark room. Everything still standing, but nothing where it was supposed to be. The dinner had barely started, and I had already made the first quiet decision of the night, which was this: I was not going to react. Not yet, not here, not until I knew exactly what I was reacting to. That decision, small, silence, made over a bread basket, would end up being the most important choice I made in the months that followed. Who we were before this, that's the part that makes it hard to explain to people who weren't there. We met in our late 20s. She was working in marketing in a mid-sized firm. I was in project management, just starting to move up. We met through mutual friends, at a birthday party neither of us really wanted to attend. I remember thinking she was sharp, not just attractive, sharp. She had a way of cutting through surface-level conversation that I respected immediately. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I wasn't slow because I had doubts. I was slow because I wanted to be sure. There's a difference. And when I was sure, I was completely sure. Down on one knee in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, no fancy setup, no audience, just us. She cried. I almost did. We built something real after that. Not a perfect marriage. I want to be honest about that. We had hard years.
Money was tight in year 2 when her company downsized and she spent 4 months job hunting. I was under pressure at work and didn't always bring my best self home. We fought about small things, the way couples do when larger pressures don't have anywhere to go. But we also built something together that felt like it belonged to us. A house we spent 2 years slowly fixing up, a circle of friends who knew both of us well, traditions like this anniversary dinner that we protected because they reminded us of who we chose to be. She was the person I called first when anything happened, good news or bad. That was just true. By the time we hit year 5, things had settled into something comfortable and steady, the kind of relationship where you stop having to work so hard at the basics because the basics have become second nature. You know how the other person takes their coffee, you know which side of the bed is theirs, you know the look that means they need space and the look that means they need you to stay close. I knew her, or I believed I did. Looking back now, I can see that I had stopped asking certain questions. Not out of laziness, I think it was more like confidence. I trusted what we had enough that I stopped auditing it, stopped checking in at the level I had during those early uncertain years, when everything still felt fragile. That's not an excuse for what she did. I want to be clear about that. But it is part of the picture, because the version of our marriage I was carrying into that restaurant, the version I had spent 8 years building in my head and my habits, was not the version sitting across from me at that table. Somewhere between comfort and assumption, a gap had opened up. I didn't know how wide it was yet. I didn't know what had moved into that space while I wasn't watching.
But I was sitting across from her in the restaurant where we had our first real date, and the name on that phone screen was not her mother's, and something in my chest already knew, even before my mind had fully caught up, that the life I thought I had was about to be examined in a way I was not ready for. I refilled her water glass. She thanked me without looking up. 8 years, 6 of them married, and I had never felt so far away from someone sitting 2 feet in front of me. The thing about red flags is that they never arrive looking like red flags. They arrive looking like stress, like a bad week, like a phase, like something you're probably overthinking because you've been tired lately and your own mood hasn't been great, and maybe you're projecting. That's how they get past you, not because you're careless, because you're reasonable. I was very reasonable for about 6 months. It started small, the way these things always do. She got a new phone in January. Upgraded model, nothing suspicious about that, but the new phone had a new passcode, and she never shared it with me. That alone, nothing. Plenty of couples don't share passcodes. I didn't make an issue of it. I filed it somewhere quiet and moved on. February. She started going to the gym in the evenings instead of the mornings. Said the morning crowds had gotten worse. That was plausible. I had no reason to question it. But the gym sessions started running long. An hour became 90 minutes, became sometimes 2 hours. She came home showered, which she had never done before. Always used to shower at home. I noticed. I said nothing. March brought a work trip, 2 nights in the city for a client presentation. Her company did these a few times a year, so that part was normal. What wasn't normal was that she was hard to reach both evenings. Texts went on a delay. One call went to voicemail, and she called back 40 minutes later, sounding slightly rushed. I asked how dinner with the clients went. She said fine. I asked which restaurant. She paused just a half second too long before answering. Half a second, that's all it was. I told myself I was paranoid. April and May blurred together. She became more guarded with her phone in a gradual, practiced way, not suddenly protective, but consistently angled, face down on counters, taken into the bathroom, carried from room to room in a way that felt new. I noticed the pattern only because I had started, without consciously deciding to, keeping a kind of internal log. Not written down, just remembered. The emotional distance was harder to name, but easier to feel. She was present in our house, but somehow less available. Conversations that used to go deep started stopping at the surface. She stopped asking about my work the way she used to, stopped sharing small details about her day unprompted. The texture of our daily life thinned out in ways that were too subtle to call out directly, but too consistent to ignore. I brought it up once, just once, in May. I said I felt like we'd been disconnected lately and asked if something was going on with her. She said work had been stressful. She said she was tired. She turned it around gently,
asked if I was okay, said I seemed distant too. And just like that, the conversation shifted from her to me, and I spent the next 10 minutes reassuring her that I was fine, instead of finding out whether she was honest. I see that now for what it was. At the time, I accepted it because I wanted to, because the alternative, sitting with the real question and demanding a real answer, felt like choosing to break something that might still be whole. So I kept being reasonable. I kept filing things away quietly. 6 months of small observations stacked on top of each other like paper, each one light enough to ignore, all of them together heavier than I admitted. By the time we sat down at that anniversary dinner, I was carrying more than I realized.
The name on that phone screen didn't create my suspicion. It just finally gave it a shape. I need to be precise about what I actually saw, because this moment gets distorted in the retelling, in your own head even. You want it to be cinematic. You want it to be unmistakable, the full message spelled out, no room for interpretation. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life gives you a fragment, a corner of the truth, just enough to know and not quite enough to prove. Here is what happened. She excused herself to go to the restroom sometime between the appetizers and the main course. Normal. She took her phone, which I had noticed she had been doing more often in recent months, never leaving it unattended. But this time, in the process of sliding out of the booth, she set it down on the table for just a moment while she adjusted the strap on her shoe. Just a moment. It lit up. I was not trying to read it. I want to say that clearly. I was not leaning in, not angling for a look. The screen simply lit up, and it was facing me, and my eyes went to it the way eyes go to any sudden light in a dim room. Involuntary. Automatic. The notification preview was visible for maybe 4 seconds. I saw the name. Not a contact name. A real first name. No last name. The kind of name you save when someone is saved casually, comfortably, like they've been in your phone long enough that a last name feels unnecessary. I had never heard her mention that name. Below the name, the first line of the message was visible. I won't write out exactly what it said, not because I'm protecting anyone, but because the specific words matter less than what they communicated, which was familiarity, a specific, relaxed, private kind of familiarity that had no explanation other than the obvious one. It wasn't explicit. It wasn't a confession.
It was the kind of message that would look almost innocent to a stranger, but to someone who knows the person receiving it, who knows their marriage, who has been quietly watching for 6 months, it landed like a door swinging open onto a room you were never supposed to see. She picked the phone up on her way past the table without breaking stride, didn't notice me noticing, walked to the restroom looking exactly like a woman at a normal anniversary dinner. I sat very still. There is a specific kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from overload, when your mind is processing something so fast and so hard that your body just stops, like a machine redirecting all its power to one function. That's where I was, completely still, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. The candle was still burning in the center of the table. The bread was still warm. Somewhere behind me, 2 people were laughing about something. The world was continuing exactly as it had been 30 seconds ago. My world had just reorganized itself completely. By the time she came back to the table, I had done 3 things internally. I had accepted what I saw as real. I had decided I would not react tonight. And I had understood, clearly and without drama, that everything from this point forward would need to be handled with more care than I had ever given anything in my life. She sat down, smiled, asked if I had ordered another drink. I said not yet and asked if she wanted one. She said yes. I flagged down the waiter, and we kept going. Here is what I did not do. I did not stand up. I did not ask to see her phone. I did not go quiet in a way she would notice or excuse myself to the parking lot to sit alone or let my face do any of the things my face wanted to do. I did not ruin the dinner. I stayed. That was the decision.
That was the one the title of this story is about.
Not a dramatic decision. No ultimatums, no speeches, no moment where I gripped the edge of the table and said something unforgettable. Just the quiet, deliberate choice to remain seated and present and functional for the rest of that meal. It was the hardest thing I had done in years. The main course arrived. Salmon for her, the sea bass I had finally managed to order despite not absorbing a single word of the menu. I ate. I tasted almost none of it, but I ate, and I held my fork correctly, and I asked her how her food was, and she said it was perfect and cut another piece. We talked. I can't tell you everything we talked about because most of it passed through me without sticking, but I kept the conversation moving. Asked about her colleague's wedding she had mentioned the week before, listened when she answered, responded in the right places. I was functioning on some kind of autopilot that I didn't know I had, a version of me that could perform a normal dinner, while the real version sat somewhere just behind my eyes, cold and very awake. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand, just briefly, a small gesture, the kind married couples make without thinking. I did not pull away. I turned my hand over and held hers for a moment, and then we both let go and picked up our forks again. And I stared at my plate and thought about how strange the human body is, how it can do one thing completely while something else is happening inside it. Then the waiter came and asked about dessert. She looked at me and said she was pretty full, but we could share something if I wanted. And I looked back at her and said, "Yes, let's get the chocolate thing." And she smiled and told the waiter, and he walked away. That exchange, that tiny, ordinary exchange, was when I made the second decision of the night. I was going to let this dinner finish, properly. Not because I was weak or in denial or unwilling to face the truth, but because I understood in that moment that how I responded in the next few weeks mattered enormously. That a reaction driven by raw emotion, even a justified one, would hand away control I could not afford to lose. If what I saw on that phone meant what I believed it meant, then I was about to enter the most important and most difficult period of my marriage, possibly the end of it. And I needed to go into that with clarity, not wreckage. So I ordered dessert. We shared the chocolate thing. She said it was too rich and ate most of it anyway. I laughed at that, a real laugh, which surprised me. The waiter brought the check. I paid. I helped her with her coat. We walked out into the night air, and she took my arm the way she always did, and I let her, and we walked to the car. And I carried everything I knew like something wrapped carefully in both hands, not ready to set it down yet, not ready to drop it either. The drive home was 11 minutes. I know that because I have made that drive hundreds of times, and I know every light, every turn, every stretch where traffic backs up on a Friday night. 11 minutes. I have never been more aware of time passing than I was during those 11 minutes. She was relaxed in the passenger seat, shoes off. She always took her shoes off in the car on the way home from anywhere that required real shoes. Music on low, something she had connected from her phone without asking, the way she always did. Small, familiar habits that suddenly felt like they belonged to a version of our life I was already standing outside of. She talked a little, said the restaurant had been a good choice, said we should go back before another year passes, said her feet hurt and she was glad to be heading home. I said the right things, agreed in the right places, kept my eyes on the road.
There is a particular kind of loneliness in sitting next to someone you love, or someone you thought you knew completely, while holding information they don't know you have. It's not anger, not yet. It's something quieter and colder, a distance that exists entirely on your side, while they sit there completely unaware, shoes off, music low, talking about going back to the restaurant. I thought about saying something. Not a confrontation, just something, a question, a small probe, something that would crack the surface and let me see what was underneath. Part of me wanted that, wanted her to say something that would either explain everything or confirm everything, right there in the car, so I wouldn't have to carry it any further. But I didn't.
Because I knew that an unplanned conversation in a dark car after an anniversary dinner, with no preparation, no information beyond a 4-second phone notification, no clarity on what I was actually dealing with, was not a conversation I could control, and I needed to be able to control it. We pulled into the driveway. She gathered her shoes and her bag. I turned off the engine and sat for just a second longer than necessary, the way you do when you need one more breath before walking into something. She didn't notice. She was already at the front door. Inside, she poured herself a glass of water and said she was tired and was going to head up, kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen the way she did most nights, routine and automatic. Then she went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything, just standing. I ran through what I actually knew, as opposed to what I suspected. I knew a name, I knew a tone, and I knew 6 months of small observations that had never quite added up to anything I could hold. That was it. That was all I had. It wasn't enough to confront, not yet, but it was enough to decide that I was going to spend the next few days paying very close attention before I did anything at all.
I turned off the kitchen light, went upstairs. She was already asleep, or close to it. I lay down in the dark next to her and stared at the ceiling and felt the specific weight of knowing something that changes everything, while nothing around you has technically changed yet. The house was quiet. That was the end of our anniversary. I gave myself 3 days, not because 3 days felt scientific or strategic. It just felt like the minimum amount of time I needed to think clearly before doing something I couldn't undo. 3 days to watch, to process, and to make sure that what I believed was actually what was happening before I dismantled everything based on a 4-second phone notification. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner twice that week, because I always cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and changing that would have signaled something. I asked about her day. I listened to her answers and looked for anything that didn't line up. I was not aggressive about it. I was just present. More present than I had been in months, probably. Paying attention the way you do when you understand that details matter. She was on her phone more than usual, or maybe she had always been on it this much, and I was only now counting. Either way, I noticed it. In the evenings especially, she would sit on the far end of the couch and scroll, and occasionally I would see that particular stillness in her, that focused, private stillness I had seen at the restaurant, and I would look back at whatever I was pretending to watch on television and say nothing. Once I walked into the kitchen while she was texting, and she turned the phone over in one smooth motion, not panicked, practiced, the kind of move you make when it has become a reflex. She smiled at me and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. We stood in the kitchen and drank tea and talked about something I cannot remember, and the phone sat face down on the counter the entire time. By day 2, I knew I needed to talk to someone. Not for advice exactly. I wasn't ready for advice. More for the pressure of it. I had been carrying this alone since Friday night, and it had started to feel physically heavy in a way that was affecting my concentration at work and my ability to sleep. I called my brother. He is 4 years older than me, and he has always been the person I go to when something is serious. Not because he gives great advice necessarily, he is sometimes too blunt and occasionally wrong, but because he's honest, and he doesn't panic, and he doesn't gossip. What I told him stayed with him. I knew that. I told him what I had seen at the restaurant, the name, the tone of the message, the 6 months of observations leading up to it. I told him about the drive home and the 3 days since. I told him I hadn't said anything yet. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "Don't confront her until you know more than you currently know." He said doing it now, with only what I had, would let her control the narrative. She could explain away a name and a tone. She could turn it into me being insecure or paranoid. He said I needed either more information or I needed to be completely prepared for every possible response she might give before I walked into that room. I already knew this, but hearing it said out loud by someone I trusted settled something in me. I asked him to keep it between us. He said, "Of course." That night, day 3,
I sat with everything I had observed, and I made a decision about how and when the confrontation would happen. I chose the location. I chose the general shape of what I would say. I decided I would not go in with accusations that I couldn't support. I would go in with what I knew, and I would watch what came back at me. I had watched long enough. It was time to open the door. I chose a Sunday morning, not because it was symbolic, because it was practical. No work commitments for either of us, nowhere either of us needed to be. No exit ramp she could take by saying she was running late for something. A Sunday morning meant we were both fully present in the house with nowhere else the conversation could go. I woke up before her, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and went through everything one more time in my head. Not rehearsing a speech, but making sure I was grounded. Making sure I knew what I wanted to say and what I wanted to understand by the end of it. I was not going in to punish her. I was going in to find out the truth. She came downstairs around 9, surprised to see me already up and sitting at the table without my phone or the television on. I could see her register that something was different. A small shift in her expression. Not alarm, just awareness. The way people sense a change in atmosphere before they can name it. She poured herself coffee and sat down across from me. I let a moment pass, and I said her name. Just her name, the way you say it when you need someone to understand that what follows is serious. She looked at me. I told her I needed to talk about something, and I needed her to listen before she responded. She nodded. Her hands were around her mug. I told her what I had seen at the restaurant, the name on the phone, the message preview. I told her calmly, no raised voice, no trembling, just the facts as I had them. I told her about the 6 months before that, the gym, the work trip, the phone habits, the emotional distance. I laid it out piece by piece the way you lay out evidence, not to prosecute, but to show that I had been paying attention, that I was not operating on paranoia, that I had built this conclusion carefully and over time. When I finished, she was quiet. And she said it wasn't what I thought. I asked her what it was then. She said he was a friend from work, someone she had gotten close to over the past year. She said it had been an emotional thing, not physical. She said she knew how it looked, but that nothing had happened, and she was sorry she hadn't been more open with me about the friendship. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I asked her a simple question. I asked her why, if it was just a friendship, she had hidden it from me for the better part of a year. Why his name had never come up in conversation. Why she had turned her phone over in the kitchen when I walked in. Why she had told me the anniversary dinner message was from her mother. She didn't answer right away. What came back was not a clean denial. It was something messier. Partial admissions wrapped in justifications. She said our marriage had felt distant. She said she had felt lonely. She said the friendship had filled something that she hadn't known how to ask me for. She said it had gotten complicated, but that she had never intended for it to go as far as it had. As far as it had. I stayed with that phrase. I asked her what as far as it had meant exactly. The answer that followed was not the answer I had hoped for. It was not physical in the way I had initially feared. She maintained that consistently, and I had no evidence to contradict it. But the emotional depth of what she described was its own category of betrayal. Months of daily contact, conversations she had never brought home, a version of herself she had been sharing with someone else, while the version she brought to me had grown quieter and thinner and further away. She was crying by the end of it. I was not. I told her I appreciated her telling me the truth. I told her I needed time to think. I stood up, put my mug in the sink, and went for a long walk by myself. The confrontation was over. The hard part was just beginning. The first thing that surprised me was how fast it spread. I had not told anyone except my brother. I had not posted anything, said anything publicly, or reached out to mutual friends.
But something had shifted in our house that week. A new tension, a new quiet, and people who knew us well enough began to sense it without being told. Her closest friend called me 4 days after the confrontation, Not to ask directly, just to check in, she said, to see how I was doing. The call was warm and careful, and I understood immediately that she already knew something. Not everything, but something, which meant my wife had talked to her, which meant the version of events being shared in that circle was already being shaped without my input. I didn't say much on that call. I said we were going through a difficult time and left it there. But it clarified something important for me. The moment other people become involved, even peripherally, even gently, the situation stops being purely private. It develops a social dimension. And in that social dimension, narrative matters. Who says what first, how the story gets framed, what details get emphasized and which ones get left out. I was not interested in a campaign. I was not going to call mutual friends and build a case. But I was also not going to be passive about the version of reality that was being constructed around me. I called a lawyer that week, not because I had decided on divorce, I hadn't, not yet, but because I needed to understand my position. I needed to know what the landscape looked like before I made any decisions inside it. The consultation was an hour long and mostly informational. The lawyer was straightforward. She walked me through what a separation would look like practically, the house, finances, the process itself. She said I didn't need to decide anything today. She said knowing your options was not the same as choosing them. That conversation settled something I hadn't realized was unsettled. I had been operating in a fog of emotion for over a week. Having a factual, practical conversation about real-world logistics cut through that fog in a way that was almost a relief.
It gave me ground to stand on. At home, things were careful and strained. My wife had moved into the guest room without either of us formally suggesting it. It had just happened, the way certain things happen when two people understand the situation without needing to name it. We were civil. We ate dinner together twice that week because not doing so would have felt more dramatic than doing it. We talked about practical things. A bill, a maintenance issue with the car. We did not talk about what was happening between us. She gave me space, which I recognized as its own kind of communication. She was not pushing, not flooding me with apologies or grand gestures. I didn't know whether that was because she respected my need for space or because she was calculating, and I was no longer sure I could reliably tell the difference. My brother called to check in. I told him about the confrontation, the admission, the lawyer consultation. He listened. He asked me how I was actually doing, not logistically, but personally. I told him I felt like I was moving through something underwater, that everything was slower and heavier and slightly distorted, that I wasn't falling apart, I was functioning, but functioning felt like its own kind of exhaustion. He said that made sense. He didn't try to fix it. At work, I kept my head down and got through each day. A few colleagues noticed I was quieter than usual. Nobody pushed. I was grateful for that. By the end of that week, I had not made any final decisions, but I had done something important. I had stopped waiting for the situation to become clearer on its own. I had started taking small, deliberate steps forward. The lawyer, the honest conversation with my brother, the quiet, clear-eyed acknowledgement that whatever came next was going to require me to be more intentional than I had ever been. The marriage was not over yet, but it was on a different footing now, and I was no longer pretending otherwise.
She asked for the conversation. Not through a text or a note, she knocked on the door of the home office where I had been spending most of my evenings and asked if we could talk. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tired in a way that had been building for days. I said yes. I closed the laptop, I turned my chair to face her, and she sat on the small couch against the wall, and we looked at each other across the room. It felt like the first honest moment we had shared in a long time. She started by saying she was sorry. Not a quick apology, a careful one. She said she had spent the past 2 weeks sitting with what she had done and what it had cost, and she understood now, in a way she hadn't before, how deep the damage was. She said she had been dishonest, not just about him, but about herself, about what she had been feeling, about what she had needed, about the distance she had allowed to grow without ever naming it to me.
I listened without interrupting. She said she wanted to try, that she believed what they had built together over 8 years was worth fighting for, that she was willing to do whatever that required: counseling, transparency, time, space. She said she knew she had no right to ask, and she was asking anyway. When she finished, I sat with it for a moment. Then I told her I believed she meant it. I said that clearly because it was true and because she deserved to hear it. I did not think she was performing. I did not think she was saying what she thought I needed to hear. I believed she was genuinely sitting in the weight of what she had done and genuinely asking for a way back. But then I told her the other thing. I told her that meaning it was not the same as it being enough. I told her that what had broken between us was not just the hidden friendship or the emotional intimacy she had shared with someone else. What had broken was something more foundational: the 6 months of deliberate concealment, the practiced phone habits, the lie at the anniversary dinner about her mother. Each of those was a choice, made repeatedly over a long period of time. And what they told me, not about one bad moment, but about a sustained pattern, was something I couldn't unknow. I told her I had asked myself whether I could rebuild trust with her, whether I could sit across from her at dinner a year from now and not be waiting for something, whether I could stop running a quiet internal audit of her behavior every time she picked up her phone. I had asked myself honestly, and the answer I kept arriving at was that I didn't know. And I had decided that I did not know was not a foundation I was willing to build a second attempt on. She asked if there was anything that would change that. I told her I didn't think so. Not because I hated her, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because some things, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. And I had seen clearly. She nodded. She was crying quietly, not dramatically. She asked if we could at least go to counseling before making anything final, not to save the marriage necessarily, but to end it properly if that was where we were heading, to understand what had happened between us well enough that we didn't carry it blindly into whatever came next. I said yes to that, because it was a reasonable request and because it was the honest thing to do. We sat in that room for a while longer without talking. The divorce papers were not signed that day. The process would take months. The lawyers, the house, the untangling of a life built together over nearly a decade. None of that was simple or clean, but the decision had been made in that room, quietly, without cruelty. She knew it, I knew it. We both sat with it. I am not the same person who straightened that candle at the restaurant table. Not worse, not better exactly, just different in the way that people become different when something they trusted completely turns out to have been something else. You don't go back to the version of yourself that existed before that knowledge. You just learn to move forward as the version that has it. The divorce was finalized 7 months after that Sunday morning in the kitchen. The house sold, the life we had built together divided into what was mine and what was hers and what simply ceased to exist because it had only ever existed as ours. That last category was larger than I expected. I think about the anniversary dinner sometimes, not with bitterness, with something more like clarity, because that night taught me something about myself that I wouldn't have learned any other way. It taught me that I am capable of staying calm inside something painful, that my instinct under pressure is not to explode but to think, that I can carry something heavy without dropping it until I know exactly where I want to set it down. That is not a small thing to know about yourself. What I lost was real. I want to say that without softening it. 8 years, a house, a future I had mapped out in my head in enough detail that dismantling it left visible gaps. The loss was real, and it took time, and it is still not entirely finished in the way these things are never entirely finished. But what I kept was also real. I kept my clarity. I kept my self-respect. I kept the knowledge that when it mattered, I handled myself with more dignity than the situation required. I did not beg, I did not rage, I did not make it ugly when it didn't need to be ugly. And I kept the lesson, which is this: comfort is not the same as connection. assuming is not the same as knowing. A marriage that has stopped being tended will not announce that it is dying. It will simply grow quiet. And if you are not paying attention to the quiet, you may not notice until someone else has been paying attention in your place. I am paying attention now to everything.